Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about something quite different. This is the KZ Duet, and I'll get a closer look at it. So those of you who are familiar with what KZ did here, it's essentially a dual driver earbud, and I wonder if we can get a look. It's a 10 millimeter dynamic driver, and there's an 8 millimeter in front of it. And I'm not sure we can actually get a clear view of them stacked together, but kind of. But yeah, essentially that's what's kind of new and different here is that they've put two high performance dynamic drivers, kind of stacked them sort of vertically, a little bit horizontal, and put them in an earbud style shell. So you do get this familiar earbud style kind of port right there. But what's a little bit different is that they included, and I guess I'll show you this version because this is a little bit better because it's on there. So they gave you a tip or a cover that fits more like a traditional in-ear, right? So you get this tip style. So this sleeve fits over the earbud body, and then you get a tip that's going to give you better isolation and kind of a more directed sound right into your canal. So it's gonna sound a little bit closer to maybe an in-ear than a typical earbud. But I much prefer this style of tip compared to just leaving it open. I thought this was maybe what they intended to do. I think that's where it sounds the best to me. And you do have to be a little bit careful. There's a little ventilation port right there as well. So try not to cover that. And I'll talk a little bit about the accessories first, right? So as I said, what's a little bit different here is you're going to get this in-ear style earbud cover tip, whatever they want to call it. So that is kind of interesting. And my sort of concern on these is this is very, very thin plastic or silicone, and I'm kind of worried that someone is going to rip that by putting it into their pocket or their bag when they're going to go to pull it out. And I'm not sure if KZ is going to plan on offering those as a replacement, but that's sort of my concern on that. I love the idea. I love the way they sound. I love the way they fit. I'm just kind of worried that once it's on there, someone is going to rip it, and then they're going to have to go to KZ and say, how do I get a replacement for it? I'm not sure what that plan is right now. But you do also get this, more traditional style silicone cover. This isn't going to do too much for you other than give you a little bit of stickiness on the earbud. I don't think that one was all that necessary, whereas this one has a pretty clear benefit as to what it's doing. So also you get I have the DSP version. So for those of you who look at this online, there'll be the last I looked, this was about $1 add-on to the Duet, and this is what their DSP is, and it's not actually lit up, but there's a little KZ logo that pops up here, and you switch the presets on the EQ using this little button that is right here. And again, I think for $1 or whatever they're going to charge for the minimal cost of having a DSP, a USB DSP, absolutely buy the one with the DSP. Even if you don't use it right away, it's a great backup. It actually does do DSP EQ. It actually does have 3 different settings. They'll call it 4 different settings, but one of the settings is essentially a kind of a no operation. It just passes through. The other 3 do something. And kind of behind the scenes of what this is, it's actually a 5-band PEQ. From Squig, you can pull it, but you can't push to it as of right now. So if you pull it, you can actually get EQs or PEQs that look like this. So on the Blue, you do get a little bit of a bass bump. On the Gaming, you're essentially the same bass curve as the analog cable, but they bump the kind of the upper mids, a lower treble just a little bit. And again, in the realm of gaming, what would you want? You want a little bit more emphasis in the upper mids to hear those sharpened sound effects, to hear those bullets. That's kind of exactly what that one is going to do. The immersive gaming is sort of what my second choice would have been for a gaming style preset. You lower the bass, right? They call it immersive, but what you're doing is clearing up the imaging. So you don't have that bass clouding the imaging, making things a little bit less sharp. So you lower the bass and things become quite a bit sharper. That's exactly what the immersive gaming is going to do. Then they kind of bump the upper mids too. So again, you're kind of making the imaging clearer, and you are bumping up the ability to hear those sound effects, and that's sort of what the immersive gaming is going to do. The analog is just what the normal cable is. It's kind of the baseline of not using this at all, but just plugging in the 3.5 millimeter. So yeah, I actually kind of like the dongle. I will say that when we get into the review part of this, I will say that I talked a lot about the mid clarity and the quality of the drivers. That sort of does come through with their dongle. I would say if you have a nicer dongle, I would start with that. It definitely scales up. The drivers are probably a little bit better than the dongle. I understand that they're kind of giving it at a bargain price, and it's actually quite nice. It doesn't have a high noise floor. It's actually, in the realm of cheap dongles, it's actually pretty nice. And again, you get some nice presets that you could use on other sets, not only Duet, but yeah, I think we'll kind of talk about. I don't mind using the dongle, but I think for those of you who have a nicer dongle, I think you'll get more enjoyment out of Duet. But in the realm of paying $1 for that one, absolutely. I think it's kind of a great bargain for what it is. And as I said, you can use it as a backup to whatever your nicer dongle is. So let's kind of jump into it. So graph-wise, that's what it looks like. And again, think about this one almost in terms of maybe a planar or an all-BA set. The graph, when you think about a graph in terms of what a single dynamic 10 millimeter is going to sound like in a normal IAM shell, and you try to think, what is this going to sound like in my ear? It looks almost like a bass headset. That is a pretty large bass shelf. And again, think about it in terms of a balanced armature or even a planar. It's not quite that way. It looks scaled. It looks higher than it is in ear because of the drivers that they used and the shell that they use and this tip. You can't quite equate this graph to what you're thinking it is, or try to compare it to other IAMs that you might have. It's just not quite, it's not going to equate to it because of this different design, the two drivers, how they stack them. It's just different. So that's why I said, what is it and why is the graph doesn't mean too much? It's for that reason. It's a stacked 10 millimeter super stroke dynamic driver is what they call it. There's an 8 millimeter in front, and it's in an earbud shell. It has an in-ear tip. Yes, this is all something different, and staring at the graph doesn't really do you a whole lot of good. So KZ in their marketing, they say it is a dual feast of music and gaming. And I think that is almost perfectly describes what this is and what kind of sound signature they gave it. It's the closest KZ has come to combining a musical sounding set with a high level of clarity for gaming in a single set. And I think they actually pulled it off really, really well with Duet. And why it works here, because that bass driver is faster than the other long stroke dynamic driver that I didn't like on Vader Pro. So I don't know if it's technically the same driver as Vader Pro. Vader Pro was the first one. I think they called it a super stroke or a something, or that was the very long stroke dynamic driver. There was a stroke terminology on the Vader Pro driver, and I didn't like on there. It was kind of slow and it felt a little bit sluggish. I didn't like it on Vader Pro. Here, it's like a different experience. It still feels full and extended enough for music, but it's quite faster. It has a better response than it did on Vader Pro. And again, I'll say I'm not sure it's the shell or the tip, how they actually got it to sound a little bit different, or maybe it's just a different driver. Something is actually different that I didn't like on that set that I do like on Duet. And the other driver, the 8 millimeter, that's going to give you sort of that clarity of Libre X. And again, those of you who haven't tried Libre X, I would say it's in the realm of 7 Hertz Zero or Chew. It's that very clean, very clear, very sharp style gaming signature that works really, really well. So here you're having kind of a fuller lower end with a 10 millimeter, and then you're getting this sharper version of a gaming style upper, kind of similar to Libre X. And I think this musical lower end plus that higher clarity upper end is sort of what gives Duet the advantage over other KZ sets, and especially Gale. I thought Gale was pitched towards gaming. Was that really my favorite set at all? No, it was not. And I say gaming, Gale, Taurus, Vader Pro, I think all of these sets were okay. Really didn't stand out to me, whereas Duet, I would say this is probably the one of the cycle that actually did stand out for me. It's the one I spent the most time with, probably the one I most enjoyed out of all of those. And at the same time, you can really feel where they made some slight tweaks to give you a musical sound, but still something that is going to work really well for gaming and the comfortable fit of gaming. You don't have to wrap it around your ears. You don't have to worry about buying tips for it. I think they got a lot of those parts right on Duet. So the sound, again, like kind of what I said, it sounds a lot like 7 Hertz Zero or Chew, but they added slightly more bass, and that gave you a more musical sound, but it didn't lose the clarity of those sets. And in my opinion, it just sounds more like an IEM with this in-ear style tip. maybe more so than an earbud. I was kind of expecting a softer dynamic driver style earbud sound, and that's not really what it sounds like. It sounds much closer to an in-ear typical KZ IAM. It's just in a different form factor, and it's a really comfortable form factor. You don't have to wrap it around your ear. You don't have to get new tips. You kind of get everything there in one package. But I do think it does sound a little bit more like an IAM. Kind of that clarity bit is more closer to something that's in your ear canal than what a typical earbud that's slightly out of it. I think that kind of comes across with Duet as well. And I think the hardest question about Duet is who should buy it, right? Who did they aim this toward? Who did they aim this, or who are they targeting? And again, I do think it's part of this people who are kind of interested in that dual feast of music and gaming. I think those are the number one target for these people. If you're coming from KZ IAMs, I think it sounds somewhere between EDC Pro and Libre X, right? It's a little bit sharper than EDC Pro. It's a little bit more musical than Libre X. And I think it does combine the best of both of those sets. Those of you who are looking for a first KZ IAM, if you can call this an IAM, to pick up and listen to, I think it's actually a really, really nice starting point. It's why I used to refer to people to EDC Pro. Very affordable set. It gave you an idea of what KZ style sets sound like. Libre X, if you were just interested in really sharp, really nice imaging gaming, I would have said go pick up Libre X. This one, again, I think it combines the best of both of those sets. If you're coming from headphones and you wanted to try an IAM, but you were never really sure where to start, what's the best KZ model to start with? Yes, this is probably one of these sets that you're probably going to want to start with and just get your feet wet with this in-ear style without a true dedicated in-ear style. If you are a gamer and you are looking for a little bit of gaming plus casual music listenings, you wanted to try an IAM but not sure where to start, again, that style person, really, really nicely suited towards what Duet is aiming to do. If you're an earbud user who wants a taste of IAM clarity and extension, I think this is slightly different than what a typical just outside of the earbud style sound presentation is going to sound like, because it's a little bit closer in ear. It's going to have that clarity of an IAM that I tend to miss on earbuds or even headphones. For me, there's always a difference between something that's in your ear canal and not. I think they always sound a little bit more detailed, a little bit higher resolution, a little bit closer to presenting the dynamic range as it is in the room. I think that's what in-ears are really good at. And I think if you're an earbud user and you just wanted to try that out but didn't necessarily want to commit to buying IAMs, I think that, again, this is kind of a good starting point for that. If you're just a hobbyist and you kind of follow along to KZ and you want to try something new, this is most definitely their newest thing that is different than pretty much all their other things, and very, very cool. I mean, I will kind of say that right off the bat, I listened to this one quite a bit, more so than any of those others, the Vader Pros and the Taurus and Gale especially. So yeah, this one actually caught my attention. It's really enjoyable to listen to. Even though I wouldn't say I'm a hardcore gamer, I would say just for plain music listening, it's really interesting to hear these two dynamic drivers, how they paired them, how they pulled off the clarity on the style shell, kind of all those things. I kind of fell right into that hobbyist, and I wanted to try something new, but I kind of got caught up with how good it actually does sound. And on the bass, again, I'll say it's full, but it still leans towards gaming. It's a bit cleaner. It doesn't have that sub-bass rumble. And I agree with that type of response. And again, I'll say that this graph is really hard to look at and try to figure out. It looks very sub-bass heavy. And I'll say for a gaming set, that's not really what you want. You want something with a faster response that sounds a little bit tighter and cleaner. You don't need another sub-bass sloppy set that is going to hurt imaging. It needs to sound full but tight and fast. And that's exactly what they pulled off on Duet. Exactly why I say don't look at that graph too closely, because it looks a little bit sloppy than it actually is. It does have a tight and fast response to it. KZ did find that balance, but so maybe it's probably going to be a little bit sub-bass light for bass heads. Again, don't pay attention to the graph. It looks really, really big in the sub-bass, but that's not really what it comes across. And I would say if you're an earbud user, you might understand that response a little bit more, where you're going to lose a little bit of the sub-bass response because of this style shell, the way they arrange the drivers. But, again, I think they actually pulled this right. If you were talking about a set that needs to go between music and gaming, you just don't want all that sub bass clouding the imaging. And again, I think the tighter, faster, cleaner response that they pulled off, something that sounds a little bit closer to 7 hertz or Chew, but a little bit fuller for music, I think they nailed that kind of balance right with Duet. And on the mids, and again, this is just another wise choice by KZ. They let the bass shelf go until about 300 instead of 200. A lot of sets drop to the floor at 200. That gives you a super, super clean sound, but not necessarily a musical sound. You do want it to carry in some warmth, and it doesn't need to sound overly thin and sharp. And again, it was just a really smart choice on Duet to carry in a little bit more bass, a little bit more warmth, to really pull off the balance between gaming and music. That's exactly what that lower did. And again, it just works. And for me, I think the standout is the clarity. I think some people will hate it as it nearly sounds as sharp as a balanced armature. It's quite different for a dual dynamic driver sound. I like BAs, I like hybrids. It's a really nice trade-off for me, but it's just quite different, you know. Also remember, they need to have that sharp imaging for gaming, and that was the trade-off for this one. Is some of their other, even Vader Pro, it had this dual dynamic or triple dynamic driver, kind of softer dynamic sound. This one is a little bit sharper, and that is going to lean exactly more into this gaming style. You want something that is sharp, clean, has really nice, sharp, defined edges so you can hear those sound effects, those bullets. Everything should actually sound sharp and clear. That's not necessarily your most musical sound. And again, I will say that Duet is one of the few sets that really kind of pulled off that I can listen to music. The voices sound quite sharp and clear. They sound quite high resolution. They sound very resolved. And all of those characteristics play into the gaming side, the things that you would look for on the gaming side. So again, I like hybrids. I like that style of sound. That's not for everyone. Some people do like a softer dynamic driver timbre. That's not necessarily what, or even Libra X. I would say Libra X is pretty much along the same lines in the mids as this one is. It's just not a soft, very natural sounding DD timbre. This one is a little bit edgier, a little bit sharper. It really leaned into what is needed on the gaming side as well. And on the treble, again, this is another one. It's really hard to look at the graph. It looks super bright, but it's not. It's boosted a bit for gaming. It has a very fun, energetic, non-peaky level. Again, it doesn't really look all that peaky. It just looks like a higher level. I kind of love it for EDM because it takes on almost kind of a V shape, a very fun V shape. This is boosted a little bit, and I thought that played really, really well with EDM. Again, it's almost BA sharp, but it has that less metallic sheen because it's a dynamic driver. And all of these, the way they carried out a little bit of energy, but still went downhill. They didn't put too much lower upper mids right here, not too much lower treble. They kept a nice level and rolled it down in the upper treble. All of those things made this stage really, really well. Again, what you would want on a gaming set is this nice, big projected stage. Why Duet sounds a bit different. That linear treble with the upper dip, it's just better balanced than most of their sets. They tend to poke up kind of almost where you see the red. They tend to bump up the upper mids. People like vocal sets. When you lower this and roll this down a little bit, you get a really, really nice balance between lower treble, upper treble. That tends to stage really, really well. You get a nice projection, a nice big sounding set. That's kind of what you get here, that big projection that you want for gaming. Still some upper energy, and it comes off as a fun V-like sound for EDM, like I talked about. Not too much upper mid. Again, I think they actually pulled off this balance, and again, part of it, probably the shell, maybe part of the tip. Part of it's the tuning on this drivers, but again, this is just another bit of the things that they got right on Duet that kind of shocked me, stood out. I wasn't expecting. I was expecting this to sound very, very different, and a lot of the things that I talked about here just kind of fell into place and worked, and it feels more like a set that KZ refined over time than something they just kind of put out and said, hey, we're going to let people try a dual driver earbud with this wacky tip on it, and we'll put it out there and get some feedback on it. This one feels a little bit more polished. It had some real intention on it and a mission on what they wanted to pull off as far as having something that is both music and gaming. So that was a long one. So thank you guys for hanging in there, and I will see you next time.